So imagine you are the CEO of a company, right? And your board of directors actively hates you.
Never a good start.
No, it's really not. And, well, your employees are heavily armed.
Mm.
Plus, they historically love to riot, and they completely despise the management.
Sounds like a hostile work environment.
Yeah, literally. And to make matters worse, you are completely out of money. Just broke. So the only way to survive the fiscal quarter is to convince this hostile workforce that you are, quite literally, a god.
Right.
And that destiny requires you to violently take over the biggest, wealthiest conglomerate on Earth.
That's a bold strategy.
It is. And today, you, the learner, have handed us this fascinating stack of analytical notes. I mean, they really prove that Alexander the Great wasn't just, some textbook military genius.
No, he was something much more complex.
Exactly. He was history's most terrifyingly effective cult leader.
Right.
He built this machine of pure momentum. And these notes, they deconstruct his campaigns through this highly specific behavioral lens.
Right, the Liz subpersonality.
Yeah. They argue that Alexander engineered a sense of absolute inevitability using this specific framework.
It is honestly a phenomenal stack of research because we are looking at the intersection of raw kinetic military force and, well, highly sophisticated perception management.
Which usually get treated as totally different things.
Exactly. The traditional historical view often separates the two. We think of tacticians over here and propagandists over there.
Yeah, like two different departments.
Right. But this analysis argues that for Alexander, a cavalry charge and a wardrobe change were the exact same tool.
Wow. Okay, I love that framing.
So we are going to synthesize the physical reality of moving an army across continents with the structural tensions and psychological realities that made that movement necessary in the first place.
Wait, before we go further into the history, I want to stop and look at this Liz concept.
Yeah.
Because the notes use this term extensively.
They do, yeah.
So for someone who doesn't have these notes sitting in front of them right now, what exactly is the Liz framework?
It's a very specific behavioral profile.
Yeah, because walk me through it. It sounds like we were talking about a sociopathic chameleon or something.
Well, it's actually not a bad starting point, to be honest.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The Liz subpersonality, as outlined in the notes you brought us, is a behavioral framework centered entirely on the performance of power.
The performance of power. Got it.
And the curation of inevitability. It is characterized by absolute identity fluidity and extreme emotional detachment from large-scale decision-making.
Wait, so they don't have, like, a core belief system?
No, exactly. A Liz persona does not have a fixed, sacred internal identity that they impose on the world.
Huh.
Instead, they read the structural forces of whatever room or empire they walk into, and they construct the exact persona required to dominate it.
That is wild.
It is the doctrine of shaping reality by making your dominance feel like a law of physics.
Because you don't fight laws of physics.
Exactly. People don't fight gravity. They submit to it.
Mm-hmm. So it's not just about winning on the battlefield. It's about making the opponent feel like resisting was mathematically impossible from the start.
Right. From day one.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to start with the world Alexander actually inherited.
We have to, yeah.
Yeah. The notes make a very compelling argument that we have to wind the clock back a bit. The war with the Achaemenid Empire, the Persians, it was essentially inevitable before Alexander even drew a sword in Asia.
It was baked into the system.
Exactly. The system demanded it.
So to understand that inevitability, we have to look at the structural hangover of the Peloponnesian War.
Right.
We are in the mid-4th century BCE, and the Greek peninsula is, well, it's a pressure cooker.
The total mess.
It is heavily militarized. The agrarian economies are deeply strained by generations of constant conflict, and the political system is just defined by bitter, exhausting rivalries.
Right. Athens, Sparta, Thebes. It's an ecosystem of heavily armed neighbors trapped in a cycle of perpetual retaliation.
Yeah, and into that fractured ecosystem steps Philip II of Macedon.
Alexander's dad.
Right. And Philip is the architect of the Macedonian military machine. He subdues the Greek states militarily and forces them into what's called the Corinthian League.
Yeah.
He points across the Aegean and positions Persia as the great common enemy. But the structural insight from the notes is crucial here.
Yeah, I found this part so interesting.
The Corinthian League was completely artificial. It was a coalition held together entirely by the threat of Macedonian violence.
It's unity at the point of a spear. Like a literal 20-foot sarissa spear.
Exactly.
They aren't looking at Persia, they're looking at Macedon, wondering when they can slit Philip's throat.
That is exactly the problem. Without an external enemy, the Greeks would not only resume their internal conflicts, but they would inevitably turn their combined military apparatus against Macedonian hegemony.
Right. They'd team up to crush Macedon.
Yeah. So war with Persia was not an option. It was not some grand romantic ambition Philip just happened to have.
Like some boyish dream.
No, it was the structural glue holding the entire geopolitical system together.
And then Philip is assassinated in 336 BCE. And a 20-year-old Alexander inherits this massive powder keg.
A very volatile situation.
Yeah, and the notes emphasize the Macedonian legitimacy crisis here. Because the southern Greeks viewed the Macedonians as, well, semi-barbaric upstarts.
They definitely didn't consider them true Greeks.
Right. So Alexander doesn't inherit a stable, loyal empire. He inherits massive, immediate rebellions.
And his response is a perfect early manifestation of the Liz framework.
Thebes, right.
Yes, in 335 BCE, Thebes rebels. And Alexander doesn't just defeat the Theban army, he levels the city to the ground.
He just wipes it off the map.
He sells the survivors into slavery. He completely erases a major center of Greek culture as a brutal warning to the rest of the peninsula.
It's pure shock and awe.
He is establishing a baseline of terror. But, as the notes point out, terror has a very short half-life.
Right, you can't build a sustainable system just on the fear of another Thebes.
No, you can't.
And the notes spell this out with the first tenet of the framework. If people don't admire you, they obey. If they don't obey, you give them something bigger to believe in.
Yes.
So domination requires an ideological payload to survive long-term.
Terror enforces compliance, sure, but belief enforces loyalty.
Right.
Alexander needed to transform the sheer terror he instilled at Thebes into a shared pan-Hellenic purpose. And the Achaemenid Empire was the perfect target to absorb all that volatile energy.
So let's talk about that target, because the collision between these two powers is fascinating.
It really is.
The notes describe the Achaemenid Empire under Darius III as vast and incredibly wealthy, but structurally decentralized.
Very top-heavy but loose.
Yeah, you have these regional satraps who operate almost like independent kings. The internal cohesion is kind of rotting.
It's bloated.
Yeah. And when I read this part of the notes, I kept thinking about a corporate environment, but like a highly lethal one.
A good analogy.
It's not just a hostile takeover. It's a startup where the CEO realizes that if the employees stop believing the company is going to change the world, they will realize they haven't been paid in 3 months and burn down the office.
Literally burn it down.
Right. The hostile takeover of Persia isn't just for capital. It's a desperate play for narrative survival. Macedon is this highly aggressive, deeply in-debt startup.
They have a brilliant product.
The phalanx and the companion cavalry. But they are entirely cash-strapped.
Yes.
The notes put it mathematically, which I loved. It says, no conquest equals no money equals no army equals no power.
That captures the mechanistic reality perfectly.
Yeah.
Because the Macedonian military was an incredibly expensive machine. You had to pay the Greek mercenaries. You had to reward the Macedonian elite to prevent assassinations.
Always a threat.
Always. And you had to fund the massive logistical train. Alexander's campaign was essentially a violent, self-financing apparatus.
So it's like a Ponzi scheme of conquest.
Kind of. You win a battle, you seize a regional treasury in Sardis or Damascus, and you use that liquid wealth to fund the march to the next treasury.
But again, you can't just tell 50,000 heavily armed men, hey, we're going to go rob the continent so I don't get assassinated by my own generals.
That doesn't exactly inspire loyalty.
No. That doesn't inspire a man to march 1,000 miles through a desert.
And that is the brilliance of the ideological framing here. Alexander wraps this brutal, self-financing necessity in the cloak of divine retribution.
Right.
He frames the invasion as righteous revenge for the Persian incursions into Greece that happened, over a century prior.
He's playing the greatest hits of Greek grievances.
Exactly. He lands in Asia, literally throws his spear into the sand, and claims the continent as Spear One territory.
So dramatic.
And he sleeps with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow, openly positioning himself as the literal reincarnation of Achilles.
He takes raw, desperate ambition and clothes it in myth.
The Lysian interpretation from the text points out that this narrative maneuvering turns raw necessity into perceived inevitability.
Because it's destiny.
Right. The soldiers weren't just participating in a massive heist. They believed they were the instruments of fate. The world required Alexander to act.
So for you listening, the core takeaway here is that war becomes absolutely unavoidable when the underlying political and economic systems reward expansion more than stability.
Macedon couldn't be stable.
No. Alexander didn't build a pressure cooker, he just understood exactly how to weaponize the steam.
Well said.
But knowing why the war had to happen is only half the equation here. The notes transition beautifully into the how.
The mechanics of it all.
Yeah. How does a bankrupt startup physically dismantle a continental empire? We move into the mechanics of dominance, the theater of war.
The strategy outlined in the notes relies on 3 interlocking principles: speed, shock, and seduction.
Speed, shock, and seduction. Let's break those down.
Let's start with speed. The notes refer to this as tempo control. And this isn't just about marching rapidly from point A to point B.
Right, it's deeper than that.
It is about cognitive overload.
Right, he was moving faster than the Persian administrative apparatus could cognitively process.
Exactly.
By the time Darius's satraps gathered intelligence, drafted a response, and mobilized forces, Alexander had already changed the geographic reality of the map.
He's playing a different game.
He forced the Persians to constantly make decisions based on outdated realities.
He dictated the pace of existence for them. And when he forced the engagement, he relied on the second principle: shock, or decisive violence.
Okay.
The notes highlight the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE as the ultimate expression of this.
I want to dig deeply into Gaugamela, because I am looking at the numbers in these notes, and I have a serious logistical question about this.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Darius has this massive, sprawling army, and the battlefield is specifically flattened by the Persians to maximize their numbers and their chariots.
Yes, they chose the ground.
Right, so if Alexander just drive the cavalry wedge straight at Darius, as the narrative usually goes, why doesn't that massive Persian line just collapse inward and swallow the Macedonian cavalry whole?
It seems like it should.
How does that maneuver not become an instant suicide mission?
It's an excellent question, and it speaks to the mechanical genius of the battle. Alexander doesn't just charge blindly.
Oof.
He creates the gap he intends to exploit. He uses an echelon formation, advancing his army at an angle, drifting toward the right side of the field.
Okay, so he's pulling them.
Yes, he is deliberately stretching the Persian left flank. The Persians are terrified of being outflanked, so they stretch their own line to match his movement.
Oh, wow. So he's baiting them into thinning their own structural integrity.
Exactly. He's making them spread themselves too thin, and the moment a gap opens in the Persian line as they overextend, Alexander doesn't target the bulk of the infantry.
Right.
He takes his companion cavalry, forms them into a wedge, and drives them directly through that specific gap, aiming straight for Darius's chariot.
Straight for the king.
Straight for the head. The shock isn't about killing 100,000 men. It is about severing the command structure instantly.
That is insane.
The moment Darius panics and flees the battlefield, the psychological cohesion of the Persian army just shatters.
Because the king is gone.
Right. It ceases to be an army and becomes a panic mob. Alexander used violence to break the mind of the enemy, not just their bodies.
Which brings us to the third, and frankly, most insidious principle, seduction.
Seduction, yes.
The notes call it selective mercy.
Oh.
He shatters the Persian army, but he doesn't burn the empire to the ash.
No, he wants to keep it.
Right. He retains the local administrative elites.
Mhm.
He starts adopting Persian customs. He positions himself as the legitimate successor, not an occupying force.
The framework calls this manipulation as fluency. Control isn't just inflicted, it is offered and accepted when it is framed as a continuation of normalcy.
To really understand how this theatricality works on the ground, the notes provide an incredible case study, the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE.
Issus is fascinating.
Yeah, so Alexander is vastly outnumbered. The Persian army is enormous. But Alexander forces the battle in a narrow coastal plain.
Between the mountains and the sea.
Right. I want to look at the mechanics of the phalanx here, because that terrain choice is everything. Explain how the phalanx operates in a choke point and why the Persian numbers suddenly don't matter.
Well, the Macedonian phalanx is essentially a walking fortress of 20-foot-long pikes called sarissas.
Huge weapons.
Massive. It is devastating from the front, but highly vulnerable on the flanks.
Because they can't turn quickly.
Right. If you fight on an open plain, a larger army will simply wrap around you and slaughter your men from the sides and rear.
Got it.
But by pinning the battle between the mountains and the sea at Issus, Alexander physically prevents the Persians from enveloping him.
So they can't go around.
Exactly. Only the men in the very front lines can actually fight. The hundreds of thousands of Persians behind them are just useless weight pressing forward.
He effectively funneled an ocean through a garden hose.
That's a great way to put it.
And then Once the terrain neutralized the numbers, he performed the ultimate theatrical risk.
Uh,
He personally leads the cavalry charge across the river, directly at Darius again.
yes.
Now, from a modern strategic perspective, putting the king at the absolute center of the violence seems reckless to the point of insanity.
Oh, absolutely.
If a stray arrow hits him, the entire Macedonian economy and political structure evaporates instantly.
From an actuarial standpoint, it is completely indefensible.
Yeah.
But from the perspective of Lydian perception management, it is calculated, necessary theatricality.
Also,
Because by placing himself at the vanguard, victory cannot be attributed to the terrain or to the generalship of Parmenion or just to chance.
right, it's all him.
Victory is attributed entirely to his personal divinity.
Uh.
He makes the victory a story about his inherent superiority.
And when he charges, Darius flees.
Yeah.
And that's the real victory.
Exactly.
By making the Persian king physically run away, he didn't just win a tactical engagement, he made resistance look fundamentally embarrassing.
It strips away all their legitimacy.
Yeah, he made the existing power structure look weak and fraudulent.
Power is most effective when it appears effortless. But the framework demands we ask the darker question.
Uh-oh.
What happens when the theater of seduction fails? What happens when a city refuses the narrative of inevitability?
That brings us to the Siege of Tyre in 332 BCE. And this is where the notes really expose the horrifying underbelly of the Liz persona.
It's very grim.
Very. Tyre was an island fortress, heavily fortified, sitting just off the coast of modern-day Lebanon. Alexander demands entry to sacrifice at their temple.
A test of obedience.
Yeah, and the Tyrians refuse. They say, we are neutral, you can sacrifice on the mainland, we aren't getting involved.
And in the Lysian framework, neutrality is a cancer.
Right, you can't just opt out.
You cannot allow an entity to simply opt out of your inevitability. It breaks the illusion of total control. If Tyre can say no and survive, then Egypt can say no, then Babylon can say no.
The dominoes start falling.
Exactly.
So Alexander decides to erase them. But Tyre is an island, and he doesn't have an dominant navy at this point. So he builds a causeway, a literal land bridge through the sea.
It's unbelievable.
I don't spend time on the mechanics of this because it's insane. They are driving massive cedar timber piles into the ocean mud, filling the gaps with stones and rubble.
Manual labor on a massive scale.
Yeah, and they are doing this while under constant bombardment from Tyrian warships and archers on the city wall.
It is a staggering feat of engineering and honestly a nightmare of human endurance.
I can't even imagine.
The Tyrians are sending fire ships, these vessels packed with dry brush and sulfur crashing into the causeway, burning the siege towers and roasting the Macedonian engineers alive.
Wow.
Alexander has to widen the causeway, build larger siege towers, and eventually orchestrate a massive naval blockade to finally breach the walls. It takes 7 agonizing months.
7 months of psychological terror for the people inside and grueling lethal labor for the men outside. And when the walls are finally breached, the restraint we saw earlier vanishes. The result is total annihilation.
Total.
We are talking about mass slaughter in the streets. Thousands of military-aged men crucified along the beach, tens of thousands of women and children sold into slavery. The city is essentially wiped from the map.
The notes provide the critical interpretation for this violence, and it's a chilling line. You don't punish resistance, you make it unthinkable.
Right. It wasn't just strategy.
No, Tyre was not a strategic military necessity in the sense of destroying a rival army. It was a messaging campaign written in blood.
A broadcast to the rest of the world.
The message broadcasted to the rest of the Mediterranean was, you can try to resist the narrative, but you will not survive the reality that follows.
It is a doctrine of eat or be eaten, operating not as interpersonal cruelty, but as the foundational law of his empire.
Yes.
He is showing the world the true cost of defying the PR campaign.
And once the physical resistance is either seduced at Eschus or erased at Tyre, a new massive problem emerges.
Right, what's next?
Well, the moment he shattered the Persian lines and took the capital, the real problem began. What do you do with the pieces?
Yeah, because the empire is huge.
You cannot hold a territory that spans from the Mediterranean all the way to the Hindu Kush with just a Macedonian army.
There just aren't enough guys.
Right. You have to become the empire you just conquered.
Which brings us to the integration of identity as weaponry. This is segment 3 of the notes.
Identity is key here.
Yeah, Alexander realizes that brute force has a geographic limit. So he starts blurring the lines of cultural identity.
He leans into the Liz framework.
Heavily. He goes to the Siwa oasis in Egypt and is hailed as the son of Zeus Ammon. He starts wearing the Persian royal diadem and the purple tunic.
The wardrobe change we mentioned.
Exactly. He adopts proskynesis, which is the Persian court ritual of bowing or prostrating before the king.
A huge deal.
And he forces his top Macedonian generals to marry Persian noblewomen in a mass ceremony at Susa. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because this was a deeply sophisticated structural move, but it created an absolute crisis among his own Macedonian veterans.
It absolutely did. Think about the psychology of the old guard, the men who fought alongside his father, Philip.
Yeah.
They had been indoctrinated for decades to view the Persians as decadent, effeminate barbarians who needed to be conquered.
They hated them.
Right. Now their king is dressing like them, adopting their customs, and demanding his Macedonian peers bow to him like an Eastern autocrat.
They must have felt so alienated.
They felt profoundly betrayed.
But strategically, from a Lysian perspective, it was genius.
Oh, purely genius.
The notes point to a specific reflection. They call it the pink album reflection, which states, power is not just held, it is performed and internalized.
It's all about internalization.
Yeah, Alexander understood that if you control identity, you eliminate opposition at the root level. If the vast network of Persian bureaucrats and regional administrators see him as a legitimate Persian king who respects their corporate culture, well, they continue collecting taxes.
And they stop funding insurgencies.
Exactly. He is literally absorbing the imperial apparatus into his own persona.
He is. But there is a massive growing tension here. We really have to contrast Alexander's abstract, highly curated narrative with the visceral, physical reality on the ground.
The actual lived experience.
Yes, because the scale of this undertaking is geographically absurd.
We really need to ground this in the physical environment.
Please do.
Because we aren't talking about a brief summer campaign. We're talking about moving tens of thousands of infantrymen from the lush valleys of Macedon down to the scrub lands of Asia Minor, across the burning sands of Egypt, back up across the vast plains of Mesopotamia.
It just keeps going.
It does. Up into the freezing, jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush, what the notes refer to as the logistical nightmare of Bactria.
An absolute nightmare.
And then down into the suffocating humidity and monsoon rains of the Indian subcontinent, all on foot.
All on foot. You are fighting the planet itself at that point.
Basically, yeah.
The sensory details in the historical record are brutal. Imagine the logistical reality of keeping an agrarian-based infantry fed in a desert.
Just food and water alone.
Imagine the creaking of hardened leather armor in 110-degree heat. Imagine the relentless pounding monsoon rain hammering on bronze shields at the Hydaspes River, turning the ground into a muddy soup.
Oh.
Imagine the sheer bowel-loosening terror of facing heavily armored war elephants for the first time.
That would be terrifying.
The reality of close combat with the sarissa and the xiphus, the short sword, isn't glorious. It is metal on metal, choking dust, shattered bone, and screaming.
And this brings up what the notes brilliantly identify as the perception gap. Yet the exact same war was being processed completely differently depending on your proximity to the center of power.
It is a critical psychological insight from the learner's notes.
Walk us through it.
For Alexander, sitting at the center of the narrative, the war is an abstraction. It is about map-making. It is about fulfilling the Iliad. It is a curated performance of universal rule.
It's high-level strategy. But for the soldier in the phalanx...
The soldier doesn't care about the architectural integration of Hellenic and Persian administrative models.
Right, they don't care about the PR.
They are thinking entirely about unit survival. Their existence is narrowed down to fear, adrenaline, chronic thirst, dysentery, and emotional numbness.
Just basic survival.
They're bonded only to the men immediately to their left and right. Their entire worldview is, stay alive for the next 10 minutes, march to the next camp.
And then there's the civilian experience.
Right.
The notes mention them as the silent majority of history. For the farmers in Mesopotamia or the villagers in Bactria, this war isn't about destiny.
Not at all.
It's about a terrifying army suddenly appearing on the horizon. It's the catastrophic disruption of their harvests, the looting of their temples, mass displacement, and then, the forced normalization under a new foreign tax collector.
They just want to survive whoever wins the theater.
Exactly. This raises an important question, though. How long can a leader's abstract, curated narrative, no matter how brilliant, sustain the physical and psychological suffering of the people actually executing it?
Right. How far can you push a biological machine before the gears literally shear off?
That is exactly where the history pivots. We enter the breakdown of inevitability.
The breaking point.
Because there is a very specific moment when the narrative finally crashes into human limits. We transition from Alexander's flawless Lysian performance to the complete fracturing of the system. Let's walk through that shift.
Okay.
The notes divide the war into phases. We spend a lot of time on the imperial confrontation, the highlight reel battles like Gaugamela, but then the war shifts into a frontier war in Central Asia.
And this is where the clean geometric shapes of Macedonian warfare dissolve.
It gets messy.
Very messy. In the harsh terrain of Bactria and Sogdiana, Alexander is no longer fighting a centralized imperial army that will obligingly meet him on a flat plain so he can execute a cavalry wedge.
Right. They aren't playing his game anymore.
He is facing scattered, highly mobile, decentralized resistance. He is fighting a hit-and-run insurgency.
So there is no single capital city to capture to make the war end. There is no Darius to chase off the battlefield.
Precisely. And so the nature of the victory changes. It is no longer about a decisive, spectacular battle. Victory becomes incredibly expensive, agonizingly slow, and morally corrosive.
Just a grind.
He resorts to burning crops, massacring entire villages, and building a network of fortress cities just to suppress local revolts.
Wow.
The narrative of glorious Panhellenic revenge is entirely dead. It is now just punitive, exhausting occupation.
And that exhaustion compounds year after year until we reach the ultimate crisis point.
India.
Yeah, 327 to 325 BCE. They cross the Hindu Kush into India. They fight the Battle of the Hydaspes against King Porus.
A terrible battle.
It is a miserable, traumatic battle in the mud against war elephants. They barely win. And then they reach the banks of the Hyphasis River.
And the machine stops.
The mutiny. The veterans sit down in the rain and absolutely refuse to take one more step eastward.
It is the moment reality overrides the narrative.
But here's my challenge to the framework. I was thinking about this while reading the notes. If Alexander is this ultimate architect of perception, if he's the master of belief in the Liz persona,
Yeah.
why couldn't he just Liz his way out of this mutiny? Why couldn't he put on the right cloak, give a soaring speech, reframe the narrative, and convince them to march?
It's a great question, but the answer is that reality eventually resists perception, and physical limits cannot be hacked by charisma. This is the structural ceiling of the Liz framework in practice. Alexander mastered external dominance. He mastered narrative control, strategic intimidation, and cultural seduction.
Right.
But he profoundly underestimated the internal limits of his own apparatus. He failed to understand the psychology of exhaustion.
So tactical success cannot endlessly override strategic exhaustion.
Exactly. You can win every single tactical engagement, but if your men are physically broken, covered in scars, wealthy beyond measure but unable to spend it anywhere, and their morale has completely detached from your ideological vision, the system halts.
It just stops.
The notes summarize this beautifully. Even apex predators must manage their ecosystem or they starve in a conquered wasteland.
Wow.
Alexander had consumed his own ecosystem's capacity to move forward. He ate all the momentum.
So, isolated and furious, he is forced to turn back.
Yeah.
And the death of the system begins.
It's a very tragic return.
He decides to march a large portion of his army back through the Gadrosia Desert in southern Iran. And it is an absolute catastrophe.
Devastating.
The heat and the lack of water just destroy the army.
Yeah.
Far more men, women, and camp followers die of thirst and exposure in the desert than died in all his major battles combined.
It is a total logistical collapse.
And then shortly after returning to Babylon in 323 BCE, Alexander dies.
Just like that.
A fever, alcohol poisoning, malaria, whatever it was, he's dead at 32.
The system was attempting to survive its own scale. It was an empire built entirely on the kinetic momentum of one singular personality.
Right.
And without that animating force,
It shatters.
instantly.
So Alexander dies, but the empire doesn't just vanish, it fractures violently. And the way it shatters proves exactly why a system built on one man's momentum is fundamentally, mathematically doomed.
It's a great case study in fragility.
Let's look at the morning after his death, separating the myth from the systemic reality left behind. Because the notes detail some incredible paradoxes that define this collapsed system.
We have to examine the social and political paradoxes first.
Okay, lay them out.
Initially, the momentum of the war unified the Greeks and Macedonians. But the forced integration of Persian elites and the sheer unmanageable scale of the empire reopened every fracture.
They didn't really blend.
No, the Macedonians felt culturally replaced, and the Persian elites realized the center of power was suddenly vacant.
Because politically, the empire was centralized entirely around Alexander's persona, not around durable, independent institutions.
Exactly.
He used Persian administrator structures,
Hmm.
but the glue holding the satrapies together was his personal authority and the threat of his cavalry.
Which made the entire structure infinitely fragile the moment his heart stopped.
Right.
And economically, the model collapsed.
Well, the economics are fascinating.
In the early phases, the war funded itself by seizing massive, concentrated wealth from Persian capitals like Persepolis.
Just huge piles of gold.
Right. But as the war expanded into the frontiers, the wealth became less concentrated, and the logistical supply lines stretched over vast, unmanageable distances.
It cost more to ship the food than the food was worth.
Exactly. The economic model shifted from highly profitable, immediate seizure to unsustainable logistical dilution. They were spending more to hold the dirt than the dirt was producing.
And the ideological shift was the final nail.
It was.
It started as a coalition narrative pan-Hellenic vengeance, but it evolved into universal monarchy, where Alexander was a semi-divine autocrat. That is a massive, unforgivable shift in the social contract for a Macedonian soldier who expects his king to be first among equals.
Understanding these deep systemic failures helps us dismantle the pervasive myths that still surround Alexander today.
Let's absolutely dismantle them.
Let's do it.
Myth number 1, he united the world.
Well, the reality is that he violently connected disparate regions, yes, but he did not unite them into a coherent whole.
Right, it wasn't a peaceful union.
The moment he died, his empire immediately fragmented into competing, highly militarized successor kingdoms led by his generals, the Diadochi, who fought brutal civil wars for decades.
Decades of war.
He wouldn't end imperial rivalry, he multiplied it across 3 continents.
Wow. Okay, myth number 2, he spread civilization.
This is a deeply colonial, Western-centric narrative.
I thought so.
He did not bring civilization into an empty, barbaric void. He invaded regions, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, the Indus Valley, that had incredibly sophisticated political, architectural, cultural, and scientific traditions centuries before Macedon even existed.
Right, they were already highly civilized.
What he spread was a new, militarized ruling configuration. A Hellenistic elite layer forcefully applied on top of existing structure.
Myth number 3, he was a pure hero or a pure villain.
History rarely accommodates pure binaries.
True.
Conquest is highly advantageous to some. For example, the later Hellenistic traders who benefited from standardized coinage, or the Macedonian elites who became pharaohs and kings, and it is utterly catastrophic to others.
Like the people in Tyre.
Exactly. It was apocalyptic to the tens of thousands of slaughtered civilians in places like Tyre, Thebes, and the villages of Bactria, and to the exhausted soldiers whose bones were left in the Gedrogen desert.
We fall into the trap of projecting modern values onto him. We look at his speed and his branding, and we treat him like a celebrity CEO executing the ultimate corporate buyout.
It's a common mistake.
But he was not operating in a modern ethical or corporate framework. He was operating in an ancient framework of plunder, dynastic legitimacy, and an elite warrior ethos where violence was a virtue. It is a historical fallacy to map our moral architecture onto him.
It is a fallacy, but what is highly valuable, and what these notes accomplish so well, is mapping behavioral frameworks onto his actions.
Yes, the Liz framework.
What does his psychology reveal about the mechanics of power itself?
Which brings us to the core lesson of the Liz analysis. What does this deep dive actually teach us?
That's the million-dollar question.
We've seen how Alexander acted as the ultimate architect of perception. He thrived using identity fluidity, adopting customs not out of cultural awakening, but as a crowbar to pry open compliance.
A very effective crowbar.
And he utilized profound emotional detachment, prioritizing the grand narrative over the staggering human cost.
But the true value of the listener's notes is that they show how the war eventually broke this philosophy.
It did break it.
The notes spend time on a brilliant concept called identity saturation. I want to explore the psychological toll of this.
Let's go deep into identity saturation. What happens to the human mind when it performs that many roles?
Well, when identity is always curated, always weaponized, and always performed for different audiences, the core of the individual begins to hollow out.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. Alexander had to be a traditional spear-fighting Greek hero to his Macedonian veterans. He had to be a distant, divine, unapproachable Persian king to his administrators. He had to be a literal living god to the Egyptian priests.
So many masks.
Exactly. If you spend your entire life modulating your identity to manipulate the room, eventually there is no core self left to return to.
You lose yourself.
The performance ceases ceases to be a tool, the performance becomes the structure itself, and everyone, including the architect, is trapped inside it.
He became a prisoner of his own PR campaign.
Yes, she did.
He couldn't stop conquering because his entire manufactured identity was the unconquered conqueror. If he stops, he ceases to exist.
It's a fatal flaw.
This exposes the ultimate diminishing returns of control. Alexander realized, entirely too late, that while you can dominate human perception and dictate a narrative, you absolutely cannot dominate time, geographic scale, or the physical limits of the human body.
The realization is stark and mathematical. When everything orbits your singular personality, you become indispensable.
Right.
And when a system relies on an indispensable center, it is inherently fragile. Remove the center, and the entire architecture collapses under its own weight.
Which is why the Liz philosophy, according to the final pages of the notes, refines itself after studying Alexander's failure.
It evolves.
A true apex figure looks at this history and learns from the collapse. They realize that control has a hard ceiling. Charisma is a spark, but it is not infrastructure.
Systems matter vastly more than spectacle.
So the evolution of the doctrine is fascinating.
It really is.
It moves from the brutal, immediate doctrine of eat or be eaten, the doctrine that burned tire to the ground, to something much colder, more structural, and far more durable.
The evolved doctrine is, build the table, or you'll always be on it.
Build the table. I love that.
Conquering the known world is, historically speaking, relatively easy if you have a monopoly on kinetic momentum.
Right.
Designing a bureaucratic ideological system that survives your absence, that is the real mechanics of power.
And that is the perfect place to bring this entire analysis back to you, the learner.
Yes.
We have spent the last hour dissecting how Alexander's campaigns were an absolute masterclass in perception management, in controlling the tempo of reality, and in the ideological framing of violence.
A true masterclass.
He showed us the terrifying, world-altering power of making a manufactured narrative feel like an inevitable truth.
But the forensic autopsy of his empire also shows us that no amount of narrative brilliance can permanently outrun physical and structural realities.
You can't outrun reality.
Alexander was unparalleled at initiating and winning wars, but he was systematically incapable of bringing them to a stable, durable end.
Because he had no brakes.
Exactly. He engineered a machine that could only accelerate, and a machine that cannot break will inevitably destroy itself and everyone strapped inside it.
Which leaves me with a final lingering thought for you to chew on today. Something the source text hints at with its warnings about the enduring nature of myth-making.
It's a great point.
We've spent this time breaking down how Alexander's greatest weapon wasn't his cavalry. It was his unprecedented ability to manipulate narrative and construct his own immoral legend.
Right.
So consider this. If we, today, sitting here over 2,000 years later, are still universally referring to him as Alexander the Great, while largely glossing over the structural instability, the shattered empire, and the massive continental-scale human suffering he left in his wake.
Does that mean his perception management campaign is still actively working on us?
Is the PR still active?
It really makes you wonder.
It's a wild thought. You handed us an X-ray of ancient history today, and we found out the machine was projecting a carefully curated hologram the entire time. Keep questioning those narratives of power. Keep looking for the fragile systems hidden beneath the spectacle, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.